This happened years ago when I was 20. Back then, I was good friends with a guy named Ethan, who I met in high school. Both of us grew up with a passion for the outdoors, and so we thought it'd be fun to go on a week-long backpacking trip in the California woods together. We've done this once before, and I really enjoyed it. I remember looking forward to it. The whole trip started off going well, but that only lasted till the second night. It was just starting to get dark, and Ethan and I were setting up our tents for the night when we began to hear the distant sound of leaves crunching under multiple pairs of footsteps. We were pretty deep in the forest, but running into other campers wasn't completely unheard of, just, I guess, a bit of a rare occurrence. Eventually, 3 guys came into view. They didn't really look like campers, they didn't have backpacks or anything. I thought it was kind of weird to be wandering around the forest this late, but I didn't think much of it. They gave us a somewhat friendly greeting, and we gave one back. They then asked us if we were camping for the night, which was obvious as we were in the process of setting up our tents with the rest of our stuff all laid out. We pointedly said yes and asked if that was a problem. We wanted to make sure we weren't on someone's private property or, just generally in a place we weren't supposed to be. They replied saying no and just kind of walked off. The whole encounter was odd, but Ethan didn't think so. He pointed out how they were most likely just hunters in the area, as all of them were armed, something I myself didn't notice. Got to a few hours later, and Ethan and I were now asleep in our respective tents. This was around the time I woke up to the sound of yelling, like multiple voices shouting in the distance. I yelled out to Ethan to see if he was awake. He was and was just as confused as I was. It was 2 a.m. when this happened. Our conversation was then interrupted by multiple gunshots. They honestly sounded like they were getting closer. I asked Ethan if he thought that whoever these people were just hunting. He responded, saying, "No, dude, there's no way they're hunting this late. I think we should go." My heart started to race, now realizing the reality of the situation we were in. We both unzipped our tents, grabbed only our bare necessities, and started hastily moving west. We moved for maybe half an hour before stopping. The yelling and gunshots were now barely audible, although they were persistent, continuing off and on up until sunrise. All night, we basically just sat there, listening to them, both wide awake from a mixture of fear and adrenaline. When the sun finally rose, we discussed what to do next. Ultimately, we decided we would wait until noon before heading back to our campsite. The plan was to then quickly pack up all of our stuff and have to be that smart to conclude that these people had genuinely tried to kill us. Further supporting this theory is the fact that nothing was actually stolen from our campsite, it was all just damaged. As far as who did this, we don't know. The only people we can really pin as suspects are the 3 people that walked up to us as we were building our tents. But this begs the question, why? Why would they do this? The whole experience has left us with more questions than answers. Nothing about it makes much sense, but I know I myself just feel lucky to be alive. In the end, we quickly salvaged all the equipment we could and made the trek back to our cars. Nowadays, I don't camp nearly as much as I used to. I'm 24, and ever since I was young, I've been into hiking. Now, I get hiking isn't all that appealing to most people, but because of where I live, it's pretty easy to get into. You don't have to travel all that far for a pretty stunning scenic view. I try to find a new trail to hike every weekend. Typically, I'll hike alone, so I always keep a knife in my backpack for protection against wildlife. Should it ever come to that, though, in all my years of hiking, I've never once had to actually use it. In fact, I've never run into any dangerous situation while hiking. Well, at least up until a few days ago. I was driving to a heavily forested hiking trail I'd never been to before. Now, I hike in the afternoon, and this happened around the time of year where the days were starting to get shorter. In other words, the sun was setting earlier and earlier each day. This was a key detail that I had completely forgotten about prior to leaving. Only after I started driving to the place did I realize it would be completely dark outside before I would even be able to finish my hike. A decision I still regret making is deciding to do the hike anyway. I got a bad feeling about it right when I started. Fast forward a few hours, and I was now about 85% finished with the route I picked out. By this point, it was almost completely dark. I had a flashlight, but still, the whole scene was pretty eerie. This portion of the trail was deep in the forest. It was so dense with trees that the moonlight could barely even find its way through. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful scenery in the day, but alone at night, it was nothing short of disturbing. It was then that I was really starting to regret my decision to carry out the hike. That's when I saw light up ahead on the trail. As soon as I shined my flashlight in its direction, it immediately got turned off. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't exactly turn back, so I was pretty much forced to go directly towards where it had been. In the back of my mind, I knew the chances of it being another hiker in the dark were slim to none. Eventually, I reached where the light came from. There was no one. Instead, there was a large duffel bag lying on the ground. I began scanning the trees with my flashlight. That's when a large, probably 6.5-foot man stepped out from behind one of the trees. My body completely froze up. There I stood, like a deer in headlights, shining my light on the guy. He then slowly revealed a machete from behind his back. Seeing this, I started running for my life down the trail and in the direction of my car. I looked behind me, and the guy was chasing me. I dropped my backpack so I could run faster. When I finally reached a clearing in the forest and could see my car, I was still sprinting. I grabbed my keys from my pocket and unlocked it. I got inside, locked the doors, and had the engine on in less than 5 seconds. However, the guy was still behind me and was able to completely slash one of my back tires before I could drive off. I drove on an almost completely flat tire for the next 5 miles back to my house. Right as I pulled into my driveway, I called the police and reported the man. Although I have no idea if he was found, quite frankly, I have no idea if the police even searched for him. A part of me wants to go back to retrieve my backpack, which contains hundreds of dollars in equipment, but there's no way I can bring myself to do it. Plus, there's no guarantee it's still even there. For all I know, the guy went back and took it. I still don't know what I stumbled upon that night. This was by far the scariest experience I've ever had and the closest I've ever felt to death. The following pictures you're about to see were taken by hikers Orly and Dante, who both live in Eagle Mountain, Utah, a small town south of Salt Lake City. For the past few years, they had been exploring forests in search of interesting things, and one day they found it. One day, Orly was hiking in Cedar Fort, just 5 miles south of Salt Lake City. While hiking, she found large amounts of animal bones and piles of junk people had dumped, but things started to get strange when she started coming across strange symbols and animal parts scattered throughout the forest, some of them in weird formations. On September 15th, she decided to bring her friend Dante along with her to show him in person the unusual things she was finding. This time, the two came across something even more disturbing. On the trail, there was a severed deer head and a pentagram surrounded by deer legs, which were not there the first time Orly walked the trail. The sun was going down, and after getting their pictures, they agreed it was time to head back to the car. But the more they walked, they realized they didn't recognize the path they were on. So, the two started looking around for anything that could refresh their memory of where they were. But as it got dark out, the two accepted that they were lost. With nothing but their phone flashlights to navigate, they started getting the feeling they were being watched. As they picked up their pace, the two started to hear the trees and bushes moving at least 20 feet to their right, made more concerning by the fact that there was no wind that night. The two started to panic and hurried onto a trail they found, hoping it would take them back to Orly's car. Just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, Orly and Dante heard a scream so deep and horrific that it sounded neither human nor animal. The two sprinted down the trail, Orly making a conscious effort not to look back, but Dante did. Dante claimed to see a large black figure on the trail behind them, too big to be a human. The two made it to the car by some stroke of luck, losing whatever was chasing them. So, they left the forest and went straight home. Orly has not returned since. Enzo is an avid hiker who in 2016 was visiting his brother in upstate New York near Downsville. Enzo's brother owns a small house and a barn up there, and from time to time, Enzo and other family members would go up to visit. This was in the late fall, and so the foliage was already mostly orange and more than half of the leaves had fallen off the trees. Enzo was hiking a narrow trail which was not far from his brother's place. This trail is in the middle of a very rural area and it connects from the occasional property to property. So when Enzo stumbled across a duffel bag on the ground in the middle of the woods, it was a surprise. The duffel bag looked like it was relatively new. It didn't look dirty as if it had been sitting in the woods for an extended period of time. There was a foul odor emanating from the bag, however, like something rotting inside. Enzo assumed the worst, but he knew he had to open the bag to see what was inside in case it actually could have been a person. He was building up the courage to open the zipper to the bag, but before he could, he heard footsteps approaching from off the trail and a voice saying, "That's mine, please don't touch it." A large man in a dirty jacket and jeans was quickly approaching from the woods and grabbed the duffel bag off the ground. The two exchanged looks for a moment. Enzo told the man he assumed the bag was forgotten by someone, and the man told him he was storing his kill from his hunt in the bag. Even though Enzo isn't a hunter, he knew it's standard to use a cooler for storing fresh kill, not a duffel bag of all things. This also wouldn't explain the foul smell so soon, as usually dead bodies only start to smell after a few days, not right after death. So he apologized and continued walking down the trail with a little more speed in his step. It's likely the man noticed Enzo's nervousness because he heard the duffel bag get dropped on the floor as he was walking away, but as he looked back, he didn't see the man anymore. Enzo nervously continued along the trail, taking out his phone to try to call his brother for an emergency pickup by the road, but he didn't have any reception in the woods. All he could do was press forward and avoid crossing paths with that man again. But as he continued on, he kept hearing leaves crunching from not far behind him, and any time he'd look back, the coast seemed clear. Eventually, his fear that he was being followed became real. He saw that man following him in the distance in a stalkerish manner, hiding behind a tree. Without thinking, Enzo started to run as fast as he could down the trail. He knew he was being followed without even looking back because he could hear the leaves being crushed not too far behind him. Enzo came to an abandoned-looking property with overgrown grass, and having grown too winded to continue running, he attempted entry to the old house through the back door and was able to get inside. Enzo hid under a cot in the first bedroom he found, and he heard the back door open again, followed by heavy footsteps moving in a hurry. They went from room to room, and Enzo could hear the man's heavy breathing from also being out of breath. The man's footsteps came into the bedroom just for a second and left right after. He didn't look under either of the two cots. Enzo heard the back door to the house open and slam shut again, but he laid under the cot for another half an hour, not taking any risks. He only got up when he realized it would be dark soon and he needed to get to a road to call for help. He proceeded to leave the house and run down the dirt trail by the house that was most likely once used as a driveway, which led him to a road. From there, he eventually hitched a ride with a passing car who gave Enzo a lift back to his brother's house, where Enzo would call the local police department and report his encounter. Given the severity of the case, police showed up at the house to get a more detailed description of the man's face, the location it happened, and other information. Though it was never technically confirmed what was in that duffel bag, the rotting smell would already be clue enough. But the fact that the man so intently chased after Enzo shows that he was hiding something that he didn't want any witnesses for, most likely dumping a dead body all. In 2014, a man named Blair and his wife Farah were spending a weekend together on Vancouver Island, which they had done many times before. The couple has a lot of experience on the island and just camping in general. Vancouver Island provides an optimal camping setting because of its mix of scenic beaches and dense forest. The couple had many successful camping trips on the island until something truly terrifying happened to them on their final outing on the island. Blair and Farah were far from any roads or civilization, enjoying the solitude. They set up camp on a beach, a good distance from anywhere, and kept a fire going. To get to the trail leaving the beach was 1 kilometer along the beach and 2 kilometers to the road through the forest. The couple had met another camper named Claude from New Zealand, who they ran into earlier that day on the beach. Claude was planning on sleeping in his van, which he parked back up on the road. The couple invited him down to the beach for a fire, and the three shared a bottle of wine, talking amongst themselves around the fire. This is where things started to get a little creepy. The sun was starting to go down by this point, and the trio kept hearing what sounded like female voices from behind them in the bushes dividing the beach from the forest. It wasn't too dark out yet, though, so it was still possible that they were just other hikers or campers nearby, or even a group who anchored offshore and the sound was just bouncing in a weird way. All three of them could agree that they were hearing female voices. On that note, it was getting late and a little dark, so Claude said goodbye and set out to hike back to his car before it was too dark. Blair and Farah stayed by their campsite and stoked the fire because Farah was starting to get creeped out by the voices, which continued on into the darkness. It sounded like two female voices speaking, but whatever that was being said was unintelligible. It sounded to the couple like the voices were not far beyond the tree line now. They stayed up very late tending to the fire, and only when the voices had finally stopped did they decide to put out the fire and go to sleep in the tent. Before doing so, the two had scanned the cove with a flashlight several times looking for boats that could have been the source of the talking, but there was nothing in sight. It was around 3 a.m. when they laid down, finally ready to catch some sleep, but about 15 minutes after they laid down, Blair and Farah heard footsteps in the area around their campsite, over by where the fire was. They came from the direction of the bushes toward the inland behind them, a direction that was not traversable by people. The couple lay there hoping it was just a bear or any animal, because the only bears on the island are black bears, which usually are very timid around people. The footsteps went from the fire, then over to the tent, then back into the woods. 5 minutes later, the footsteps came back again to the fire, and now, clear as day, there were two female voices talking gibberish very loudly. Their communication did not resemble any languages known to Blair or Farah, and they seemed to be talking over each other, having what could barely be considered a conversation at full volume in the dead of night, very far away from civilization, without using lights to navigate through the dense brush relatively quietly in a direction that seemed impossible to traverse on foot. The two voices moved from the fire pit area over to the tent, still talking at a loud volume. They stood over the tent talking for a few seconds, then went completely dead silent. They went back into the woods to never be seen or heard again. Blair and Farah lay there completely frozen and afraid for a long time. They woke up around 11 a.m. the next day because of how late they fell asleep. They packed up first thing and never returned. The couple probably made the best decision to remain quiet in the tent, not drawing attention to themselves from whoever or whatever was outside.